I'm Britton LaRue, and this is Moon to Moon. Moon to Moon is a space to consider, celebrate, and share the ways we come home to ourselves, anchor through change, and uncover our power. 1 month, one phase, one loving step at a time. Welcome to Moon to Moon. This is Britton, your host here on Moon to Moon. And in this episode, I am going to be talking with you and talking with my friend, Erin Kelley, about a part of the chart that's a little mysterious to us. It's one of the houses of the chart that we see but darkly, and that is the 8th house. And I wanted Erin to come on because Erin has Sun and Moon in Libra in the 8th house, among other planets. It shifts a bit depending on the house system that she's using, but the Sun and the Moon, that new moon then in Libra that she has, is unchangeably in the 8th house, no matter the house system that she's using. So you can say then that Erin is an 8th house person. Listeners may know that I am interested in parts of ourselves and parts of our charts that are a little bit more notably different to talk about, uncomfortable to talk about, strange to talk about. I myself have my Sun, Mercury, Venus, and Pisces in a house similar to this, the 12th house, another one of the houses that seems to have a gazillion different meanings, and they don't even seem to sometimes be related at all. I'm very used to sitting across from someone who has placements in houses like these and holding space for how to talk about that. When it's not clear cut how you're going to start peering behind the door, looking in the window of these houses. So the 8th house felt ready to have its own attention. And I was excited that Erin said yes when I asked her to come talk about her experience being an 8th house person. The 8th house, I'm going to share with you a little bit about it so that you have something to begin with on the front end of this conversation in case you're just learning astrology. Maybe you've just discovered that you have placements in the 8th house that you want to learn more about. Maybe it's the title of this podcast episode that drew you to this space and you're just learning. So I want to spend a little bit of time sharing with you some things to think about as we move into this conversation. And then I'm going to share Erin's bio and about her contribution to my upcoming offering, Cave Space, which is very much an 8th house offering. The truth is that I'm an 8th house space holder. My classes tend to bring up a lot of 8th house material. Certainly one-on-one sessions with me are very 8th house. And my transformation container, my one-on-one 6-month container, is completely 8th house. I'm attracted to the 8th house. I'm not afraid any more of the eighth house, although I certainly was afraid to tiptoe in this zone for much of my life. It has been very liberating for me to just let myself become an eighth house person. And that makes sense because my only placement in the eighth house is Uranus, and Uranus is an outer planet that we think of as the great awakener and a liberator of the topics in the domain of life represented by the house where you have Uranus. So in this way, you could say that I've been invited since birth to let myself get liberated in an eighth house kind of way. But as I'm going to tell you about, because I'm going to read the section on the eighth house from my Scorpio workbook, it really is all about proper timing, how we get to know ourselves at the eighth house place. We can't push it. It's all about appropriate exposure, appropriate timing, appropriate dosage. And eighth house topics are not, it is not wise to push before we're ready. And it's not wise to try to take on more and quickly when we're not ready. So this is why I think spending time in the eighth house is really powerful for emerging astrologers. Maybe you consider yourself an emerging astrologer. This is a zone to give a lot of respect and care when we're sitting in consultation, when we're sitting across from another human being in their eighth house. And I'm really such a cheerleader for cultivating skill and getting informed on the topics of this house so that as you tread into this space with any clients or friends that you're reading for, you can do so with great, loving, compassionate, skilled care. Yes, so let me read from you what I put together in my Living the Sign Scorpio workbook. So Scorpio is the eighth sign. And so there are ways in which we can draw connections between the eighth sign and the eighth house, but they are not the same thing. But I do talk about the eighth house in the Scorpio workbook. The eighth house relates to the deepening of certain key partnerships in which we merge our money, psychology, and erotic bodies. We can label this house by the phrase, I merge. Matters of the eighth house speak to what a culture determines is taboo, in the sense that these are parts of self that we tend to keep hidden. So if we're looking at like a list of meanings for the eighth house, something that unites them all is this idea of it being sort of taboo to talk about the topics of that house, like say, at a cocktail party or over lunch with someone that you don't know really deeply. And I got that word taboo for the eighth house from Caroline Casey's wonderful Visionary Activist Astrology audiobook, which is one of my most favorite astrology texts ever. So that I continue, our shared financial investments and inheritances with a partner are part of the eighth house zone because we largely do not talk about or physically even see how we've blended with another person in this way. Changes in commingling are also described therein, such as when partnerships or marriages dissolve. The eighth house also speaks to the stuff we share with someone with whom we are deeply collaborating or merging. Through these intimate connections, we reveal parts of self that we usually keep hidden away from the world. Our fears, compulsions, insecurities, deep, intense feelings, financial debts, and so on. This could be with a close lover, a therapist, tarot reader, Reiki healer, psychic medium, shaman, accountant, or even your closest dear friend. Sometimes the eighth house is completely unconscious to us. We might have learned as kids to deny, repress, or lock away parts of who we are. And the eighth house is where our fragmented selves go until we go retrieve them consciously. I share the eighth house is a part of the chart where we have to go deeper in order to perceive ourselves clearly. I once heard that whatever we have in our eighth house will be hidden to us until the right timing. There truly is good and proper timing to our self-healing processes. Someone could come to you with just the right advice, but it won't mean anything to you if you aren't ready to receive it. Have you ever been angry at someone for telling you something you weren't able to hear yet? I negotiate very carefully with clients when it comes to their eighth house, because it's not my job to force an awakening or create discomfort if timing isn't right. I will send out a feeler to gauge if the person is willing to go with me. I have found that the eighth house space is just not a welcome one for anyone who has not done therapy, trauma healing, self-reflection, or honest emotional and psychological accounting of any kind. I trust that only the most gentle and compassionate questioning is needed to bring a subtle shift. And I continue to talk about how the eighth house, to me, is a house that I do connect with unconscious trauma. I connect to the rubble of childhood, where bits of ourselves that we thought were wrong, problematic, unlovable, not respectable, go into a closet. Where we have abandonment wounds, attachment wounds that developed unconsciously through childhood and start to show up as we start to do these mergings in our intimate partnerships. And so in many ways, to me, we can think about the eighth house as our underground, which is something that I talked a lot about in the last episode, called How I Reframe My Struggles in Magical Language. So I would definitely encourage you to go there. I wanted to share with you before I close this book what I shared as my affirmations for the eighth house. I am not afraid to meet and greet all parts of myself. I witness and value the beauty of raw primal honesty. I identify and extract hidden poison within me and within my relationships. I detect what other people might repress. I trust what I perceive, even if it is not visible or tangible. I integrate and heal from the emotional consequences of my partnerships. I face and tend to my emotional, financial, and ancestral debts. Those are some big ones. So you see, like, this is a part of the chart that is prickly. It can be prickly. It can be spiky. Can be combative, can get triggered. All these things that our sweet human bodies do when we feel that we are being invaded into a zone of ourselves that we have very intelligently and compassionately covered up so that we wouldn't have to get agitated by it. Right? And it is in these deep collaborations and these deep partnerships that things come up, including those that we have with space holders, like me, for example, with my one-on-one clients in transformation, with your therapist, with someone who you are giving consent to go into some of these spikier places with you because you know that parts of you are in hiding, are repressed, are traumatized. And maybe these parts of you are not even from your childhood. Maybe they're from your ancestors. Maybe they're from past lives. In many ways, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. But 8th house spaces give us opportunity to release, to air out, to off gas. And it is in that gentle, compassionate process that we feel some relief. And we feel like we can integrate parts of ourselves after. So the 8th house experience then for people who have important placements in the 8th house, as you can imagine, there's an aspect of like growing up where parts of like fairly significant parts of you are in this space and it's hard to see yourself. It's hard to access the full objective view of yourself. It's a common thing for a lot of 8th house people to experience a lot of fear as children, to perhaps experience different mental health journeys as you're working through the complexities of this invitation in this life. And it is often those with 8th house placements who can become quite skilled at being space holders for others because they have found a way for themselves and they know what it's like. And they're kind of inclined to be interested in these topics because their life is really marked by them. And they can become those friends that are fierce with you and can sit with you without judgment as you air out and off gas and release what you want to release to them, the ones that you tell your secrets to. So the 8th house folks in our lives play a really significant role, and they're carrying a very significant assignment, we could say. And Erin Kelley is one of those that I know in my life who is living her invitation and in service to others from all that she has learned from caring for herself. And we have a really, really rich conversation that you're about to hear where she speaks to this. So let me tell you about Erin's bio. Erin Kelley is an astrologer and intuitive who loves finding beauty and joy in the most unexpected places. A former Kundalini yoga and meditation teacher, full spectrum birth worker, and consultative strategist, she believes the book of knowledge is never truly written and has an insatiable curiosity which is continually calling her to adventure and leading her down a number of paths. Erin has studied the nature of invisible things throughout her life, and in 2020, she began working on the concept of slow magic, which is the practice of slowing down and stepping into sacred time to deeply connect with nature and to the land to relax, restore, and reveal the natural self. When not ensconced in enthusiastic communion and conversation with the otherworld realms, you can find Erin on the internet at slowmagic.com, and that's magic with a K, a CK. And I've been able to experience Erin's gifts. Yeah, I had a really profound reading with her, where I was able to witness her just receiving so much from the unseen realms to help me. We giggled. She was receiving so much to share, she could hardly get it all out. And what's really remarkable about her mysticism, and I think this comes from her chart ruler, Jupiter, because she's Pisces rising. Her chart ruler, Jupiter, is in Taurus the slow earth sign. And if you study astrology, you may be aware that the planet that rules the sign of your ascendant, your chart ruler, its placement in the chart can teach you so much about where to self-actualize, where to individuate, where to learn about yourself. And for Erin, that is third house daily life, rituals in Taurus, in Jupiter. Well, with that's where Jupiter is placed. So I invited Erin then to contribute to this new offering cave space that you may have heard me talk about. Across Scorpio season, I'm going to be doing some live teachings. But other than that, it's mostly a library of resources from me and from the people that I've tapped to contribute. So it's an offering that I'm curating as well as teaching in. And I knew that I wanted Erin to do something on the 8th house for us. And so Erin's offering is currently titled Life After the 8th House, Healing, Miracles, and Other Riches of the Unseen Realms. And it's going to be a lecture discussing strategies and practices for working with the mysterious dark as an ongoing practice, utilizing one's natal chart as a catalyst for co-creation of one's desires. So thrilled to have Erin joining me in this conversation on Moon to Moon today, and thrilled to have her joining me along with the other contributors to Cave Space, which you can learn about at my website. I'll have the links. Register soon so that I can get the Scorpio workbook to your hands. The first 30 get a Pluto ritual oil from Witches for Bernie, Ashley Estabrook, while supplies last. So here's my conversation on the 8th house with Erin Kelley. Welcome to Moon, Erin.
Thank you, Britton. I am so overjoyed and excited to be here chatting with you.
I'm so excited to see what juicy wisdom comes forward in our conversation.
Me too. Me too.
You are always someone that I think of as just a bringer of wise words.
Thank you. Thank you. I feel like I can't take credit for that though. I feel like it is part of like just the cosmic wisdom speaking through me. Like, you know, like a mouthpiece for the universe.
I love it. I was thinking about how we connected, and I remember that when you registered for the Magician's Table in 2021, I knew your name because I had been mailing you workbooks.
Yes, I was probably almost through my first year at Portland School of Astrology. And I'm hungry for information and just really wanting to get different perspectives and points of view on things. And I came across your workbooks, and it was during like Pisces season. And obviously I'm Pisces rising. So I was like, ooh, this is just an area that I'm getting to know to explore. And so I think I saw it on Instagram for Pisces season, like the Pisces workbook. And I clicked through, and then I saw there were 12, and I'm like, okay, I just got to have them all.
Yes, that's what it was. It was like, oh my gosh, somebody bought all 12. Yay.
You know, like that's that Jupiter ruled, chart is like, if a little is good, then a lot is better, right?
Must have it all. And so then it must have been the following month that you felt the yes to Magician's Table.
Yeah. So I think I had bought the workbooks and then was on your mailing list and started following you on Instagram, and then saw the Magician's Table. And I want to say, like, as soon as I read it, there, we talk about the full-bodied yes, or a fuck yes. Like that's pretty much like what happened to me when I read that. And I was like, oh, it was perfect. It was perfect timing just for where I was at and what I was wanting to explore, and the ability to be in that container with other people kind of going through the same process in their own way just was really exciting and enticing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then of course it delivered so much. Like, I can't even probably encapsulate what that experience was like, but so much so that I did it again.
Yes.
Next year.
And they were very different experiences.
They were. Yeah, they were unique unto themselves. And yes, and it was different experience. And I was also a different person, a year later.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, that shapes the experience too.
Yes. So the first year you were moving through your astrological studies, learning a lot about yourself, I imagine, in the process.
Yeah.
This does happen. And were you hoping that the Magician's Table would be a container to help you feel confident in readings?
That, and also when I started Portland School of Astrology, my intent wasn't to become a consulting astrologer. Mm-hmm. It was to do, to learn more. Like, I had gotten to a point with studying astrology on my own that I felt like I needed more concentrated curriculum and effort behind that, and guidance. But then, as one does, you start to see how, this may be helpful for other people, and you do, converse with one another. And, my undergraduate studies was in psychology. I always had the intention to go on to be a social worker, which never happened. So I think, like, it rekindled the helper archetype within me. And that's when I was like, oh, I need to try this on and see if it's something that is something I want to pursue, the consulting astrology side of things. Mm-hmm. So I think that's really what appealed to it. It was like, hey, this is a intensive container for praxis where we're going to get rapid experience and data collection. And guess what? It's okay if you haven't had a lot of experience doing this before, because you've got, 11, 12 other people in the same container that are at the exact same point that you are. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And how beautiful it all was to watch everyone, transform and kind of go through that process. It was amazing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then in 2021 into 2022, what shifted in your journey that you wanted to do it again?
Yeah, well, I got a taste of it. So I had been holding space for others in various ways, kind of throughout different phases of my life, always having one foot in the metaphysical or the kind of occult practices. I had been reading tarot for a while, but had been moving away from that. And in 2021 to 2022, I had been part of also like the Great Resignation. So I also have like another job, a day job, and had gone through such immense transformation as a result of studying astrology and the Magician's Table that it started to help shape my life in a new direction. And it was more of like looking at my natal chart as not just, hey, here's something about you, but here's also a key that holds potentials for you, and go and explore this. And so I continued to do that. And then I was just in a whole different place in terms of like my understanding, and I was starting to shape a little bit more about how I want to read, how I want to practice, where I think the first time around, it was more like, okay, if you haven't, first time you meet with someone, you do sun, moon, rising. And, there's like a formula almost,
Yes.
but that it wasn't me. And then, so the second time when I came in, it was after all of this personal transformation that happened. And then also being able to say, okay, who am I as a reader? What is of interest to me? And what are the types of things that I'm interested in reading and looking at? And just understanding that I was going to develop my own style the second time. And so the second round of Magician's Table helped me hone my personal offerings as they are at the current moment.
And what have you been honing that into? Like, what gets you really excited?
Oh gosh, everything can kind of get me excited from time to time, but I'm super into the looking at like the dark houses, so like the 8th house, the 6th house, the 12th house, and all of the, the magic that unfolds as part of that. And then also working with the malefics, so Saturn and Mars, and really starting to see those as helpers in like wielding our personal power and our skill. And that's kind of where my interest lies right now. But then I'm also simultaneously in this evolutionary astrology container now, which is fascinating from a soul development perspective. And my psychology undergraduate student, past life Erin, is like very excited to be in that container and talking about, soul level transformation, and finding that very interesting as well. And that's not something I'm offering currently, but it's something that I'm in praxis and study for right now. Yeah.
So I'm curious, when you first realized as you were studying astrology, oh, my sun and my moon are in the 8th house. I know some planets change depending on house system you use, but your sun and your moon for sure are always in the 8th house in any system. Yes.
That's correct.
What has been your journey with understanding yourself as an 8th house person, or someone who landed here with an 8th house invitation?
Yeah. That is something I continue to unpack to this day, but astrology was extremely helpful in really understanding like the 8th house is not something that you can see very easily. And it started to help me understand why relationship was so important to me, and understanding like who I am in relation to another, being able to see myself reflected in another, or the dynamic in a relationship gave me like breadcrumbs or clues about myself and like who I might be. Yes, I had interests, but just in terms of like understanding my values and understanding my belief system, oh man, the 8th house has helped me really unpack all of that. And a lot of the question I have, like so much of my youth and growing up is like, what do you want to do with your life? Like, I'm still don't know what I want to do when I grow up, like it's this constant transformation. And it suddenly helped me understand why some of those thoughts and feelings and decisions were so hard to pin down, that it was difficult to see. And it's been a lot later in my life that I'm actually able to put words to a lot of these things. And astrology was something that helped me give language to a lot of experiences that aren't very direct and were difficult to describe.
Yes.
And so that's been a real gift of the 8th house, is just becoming comfortable in the dark and not knowing, being comfortable with the question, and then holding a paradox that one thing might be true, but it might not be true tomorrow. And that's okay. And this, it's so funny, Britton, like I have this love-hate relationship with social media. And part of it is like, I get in these periods where I'm not very active publicly on social, and then I like want to get back into it, and it's like really challenging to find the moment. Like if you think of double dutch, when the two ropes are going and you have to like, so you don't trip up and stop the motion, you have to like jump in at the right time. But it's when you're constantly transforming
Right.
in thoughts, feelings, beliefs, what have you, it's really difficult just to jump right back in, because how you might really feel or think about one thing in one moment can change just very quickly and just transform. It's like this constant evolution. And it's just come to accept that that's part of this. That's part of this package, you know?
Yeah. For someone listening who may be not familiar with the eighth house, like if someone with your chart, which is a new moon chart, came to you, where would you begin with like questions to ask them or things to say to kind of begin to peel in back the door to the eighth house?
Yeah, that's a great question. Generally, I ask just more like what their experience of themselves is like, or like how they experience themselves, or like how they would describe themselves. But then also like a lot of the ways that I approach my readings currently is from like a value based, like what are values and desires, because I think that helps. One, if someone doesn't know, and a lot of us don't, right? Or It might change or shift. Like that's an extremely juicy place to start, and then unpack some of the rest of it. But yeah, I would just be curious, like what that person's experience is like, because I feel like for me, also my eighth house is Libra. So again, just coming back to understanding oneself through interaction with others is like, it's been foundational. Now, unpacking my belief in my worth and my value from how I am in relationship to other has been a large part of this work. But yeah, if someone came in with an eighth house chart, I would probably still start with values and desires, and then kind of back into it that way, because a lot of times it's difficult for folks to kind of describe that or see that. So I would kind of that's kind of, I think, why I approach it that way.
Yes, I feel as a practitioner, especially if you're talking to someone who doesn't know a whole lot about astrology or a whole lot about their chart, when you're gifted a chart that has a lot of eighth house placements, it is like a craft to feel into how to talk about it without it feeling like we're contracting the space with fear, around like, wait, what are you saying?
Totally. Yeah. And that you're speaking about that is making me think of like one of the other ways that I read a little bit differently is I don't take the time necessarily to explain everything in the chart, or like sun, moon, rising, like we talked about. I really want to get to the heart of like what's happening in your life, where are you wanting to go, where are you getting tripped up, and let's just get really quickly into why some things that I'm observing of why this experience might be happening for you, and then let's talk about some remediation perhaps. Yes. And that's different from, so I explain that to folks when they come to me usually is like, hey, if you haven't had a reading before, just know this is the way that I do it. It's not the way that everybody does it. And that, just be aware, not buyer beware or anything, but more like, hey, there's different flavors, for everyone. Yes. But most of what I find, like the people that I do find their way to me and are working with me, it's usually because they are experiencing some sort of transformation. They're in transformation, or they are about to be in transformation. And they're having challenges in understanding why what they've always done may not be working anymore. And they want to get somewhere. I get a lot of people who are like, nothing's happening. And like in traditional astrology, like the 8th house is like the house of idol. It's the idol house, like where it's a liminal space. It's a transition. There's nothing happening there, but so much is happening there at the same time.
It's under the surface.
Yeah. And so I get a lot of people that they do have, they might have trouble articulating exactly what's going on. And so taking a look at the natal chart, but then also transits and the progressions are really helpful at giving context and language to that.
Yeah, I'm with you. It was kind of a time of crisis for me when I realized like I didn't want to do sun, moon, rising readings anymore. And it was like, how do you even do readings then? Because it seemed like that's what everyone did.
Yeah.
And it's really, I'm with you, just wanting to be with someone with where they're at, and meeting them there with the chart.
Yes. And I had the pleasure of reading for like a quadruple Virgo friend of mine who was like, I did a reading for them and they were like, this was great, but I want your version. They're like, and I'm like, this is my version. And they're like, no, it's not. They could see something I couldn't see. And it took me a while. It took me probably another year to get to where I knew what my thing was. But now in hindsight, I can see what they're saying. Like the reading that I gave them wasn't wrong, but it also wasn't, it was the prescription of what I thought a reading was versus what my actual gifts were to offer someone. Yeah.
I'm curious if your Instagram name, Slow Magic, is related to the 8th house.
It is. Slow magic came to me before I actually knew what slow magic was. I knew what it was conceptually from like thinking of like slow food movement or slow fashion or slow anything. And slow anything for me is about, it's about enjoying of the process. It's the pleasure in the process. It's not trying to rush through just to get to an end result, which is what so much of overculture is all about, the big splash at the end. And I started thinking about the process of transformation. And yes, there's lots of rapid transformations that happen on many different levels across the spectrum. But if you think of transformation, capital T, it's one big, slow evolution and unfolding over lifetimes. And that gives me goosebumps now just talking about it. And so slow magic, the name and that concept of pleasure in the journey and in the process came to me before I knew what any of the offerings are. And it also is, I think we talked about this in different spaces before, it's sometimes, a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because sometimes I want it now. I want to know now.
Yes.
I want the next step now. Why is this taking so long? And then I'm like, oh yeah, slow magic. Sometimes
we're also conditioned here. So
yeah. Oh, totally. Like that's why I say, like, I'm still a work in progress for sure. I don't have anything figured out, for certain. It's just what I'm able to work with right now and what's helping right now,
How do you think about like when you started learning about the 8th house and then you were looking back over your life, like before you had this term,
Yeah.
Are there certain aspects of your childhood or your experiences that you're like, oh, 8th house? Yeah.
Yeah. I had, granted, Pisces rising too is part of this, but I had the most amazing imagination and kind of imaginal realm. And I'm realizing now that was me being a little kid playing in the eighth house. Like, you know, the an intense feeling too, right? And seeing not with one's eyes, but with one's heart and one's, you know, feeling into possibility and play. And there was so much of that magic there. And, you know, I was thinking about it, the imaginal kind of play stuff for me. I continued to go there or play there, like into my, probably till the time I went to college and even in college. And I started college early, like at the age of 17. And so I was still pretty like, you know, you think about now, back then I was like super old and mature. And now I'm like, whoa, what a baby. And I see that now as like, that was how I was accessing the eighth house, even though I wasn't aware of it or directly observing it. And then also mental health, clearly, like after, I've had, you know, acute issues with depression from time to time, and anxiety, and mental health stuff is also eighth house stuff. And so there was a lot of experience with that as well through various degrees. So I'm seeing, I can look back and see that as part of an eighth house thing as well. And then, you know, when I started college, I didn't really know what I wanted to study either. I bounced around from a variety of different things. I actually started my undergraduate undeclared, but I was going the route of an ag science major because I did want to go to veterinary school eventually and be a veterinarian. And that didn't work out, but I bounced around so many different things. But when I landed on psychology, because I just needed to pick something and finish my degree at some point. And so I'm like, psychology. And of course, people are like, oh, great. What are you going to do with that? And I'm like, I don't know. But I found it so fascinating and so interesting, like to understand behavior and motivations and how everything works from a like brain and behavior perspective. And it just kind of lit me up. And I'm seeing that, you know, is related to eighth house stuff, obviously, as well. And I think too, the other stuff looking back, had I had free choice of probably dress and aesthetics, which, you know, I didn't, I totally would have been a goth. I look back now and I'm like, yes, goth
you can still have your goth moment.
Oh, I do. Yeah, I'm a closet goth for sure. And yes.
Yeah, I feel like I'm just coming into my personal style, mid-40s.
Yeah. Same.
Yeah, it's the best.
Yeah, you have the freedom and I think confidence too, with the experience that you get after a certain amount of time of making it through so many rotations around the sun.
Yes, I think enough fucks have to be let go.
Yes, yeah, they have to be buried.
Yes. Yeah, so I also think from me about the eighth house is like kind of entanglements with close relationships. Do you been a thing for you?
Yeah, and that happened, I would say the entanglements happen maybe more into my mid to late 20s to 30s, those types of like romantic relationships, especially. That definitely. And then just the fact that it's an eighth house Libra and I'm a Pisces rising, like there was no hope for me there. Like, you know, like how could you not have enmeshments and entanglements and codependency? And again, not knowing really like who I was. And that just took time. Like, unfortunately for me, it just took time. I look back and I'm like, would there have been any other way for me to more succinctly get to the point of who I am and understand that? And I haven't been able to figure that out. So I think it was meant to happen. Those relationships that were difficult forged me in who I am and my personality and what my belief system are, and helped show me where like my beliefs were where I had adopted were not really mine. That was the great undoing of me, of everything that was needed to be discarded, was like through very intense relationships. And it really, I had to, it comes back to that value conversation around understanding that I have inherent value just in who I am. And it sounds so straightforward when talking about it out loud, but in the experience of it and not being able to see it and not know it in the way that I know it now, I derived my value from the worth that I had for the other person. And so when those relationships dissolved or broke apart or imploded, all of a sudden you're left with this big gaping hole and trying to find different ways to fill it, sometimes skillfully, sometimes not. And yeah, and it just brought me closer to myself in the end. And that's really, you'll hear, and I had astrology readings before when people talk about Libra as like the understanding of right relationship. And seventh house being the house of partnership, which depending upon which house system you're looking at, some of my stuff in the eighth, ends up in the seventh as well. Really just talking about the relationship to myself as being what I needed to develop. And that didn't make sense to me for the longest time until I had been through all of these situations where I had seen that in the moment, for the love of another, I had been abandoning myself. And that's the great love that I've been seeking this whole time.
Oh,
yeah. Yeah.
I'm thinking about how Venus rules Libra and how your chart ruler Jupiter, because you're Pisces rising, Jupiter's your chart ruler. Saying that for listeners.
Yeah.
Is in Taurus, ruled by Venus. Do you feel as if Venus has been like your guide through these understandings?
Yes. Venus, so important in many ways. And my South Node is also in Taurus. And so South Node, North Node, just thinking about like, there's so many negative aspects that astrologers will usually talk about with the South Node, but there's also comfort there, right? And with the South Node and then my chart ruler in Taurus ruled by Venus, I find great comfort in beauty, in the senses, coming back into the body and learning how to develop connection to that, and to be able to connect to myself and to connect to anything, like have a relationship with anything. That has been just absolutely transformation and magical. And so I know when my senses get a little fried, I know that I need to, or not my senses, my nerves, excuse me, have to come back into the sensory, the pleasurable sensory. And then that also plays into like slow magic. It's like, the sensual pleasures. Like I enjoy good food, obviously, who doesn't? I enjoy a good experience, like having a small gathering, an intimate gathering of friends for dinner is just like, chef's kiss,
Yeah.
So pleasurable. So finding those little moments of pleasure and then infusing pleasure every day, especially when, going through difficult transits. Yes. so very important. Yeah.
And so helpful to the Pisces parts of us.
Yeah. Yes. And if you think, right. And Venus is exalted in Pisces. So, Jupiter rules Pisces, but then Venus is exalted there. So there's all this what I love about astrology is like just the many different ways that interpretation can be reflected.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that helps explain why there's value in looking at different house systems as well, because you can get like a new angle or new perspective on something that you might not have thought about before.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I find them all resonant.
Right. I like to have a both and.
Yeah.
I feel like astrology is all of astrology, like all the lineages, they are distinct. And also I'm not interested in which is best approach.
Totally. Because nothing works 100% of the time.
Right. And if it's helpful to reframe it a different way, why not?
Yeah. I love that. Whenever I see criticisms on astrology where folks will, say that it's narcissistic and people are just, I'm like, well, yeah, duh. Like, of course it is. Like, we all want to know, and especially someone who is an 8th house sun and moon, you want to, I'm searching for myself. I can't see myself the way that other people do.
Yeah.
So I need systems to help me interpret what that is. And it's so weird to talk about that. Because if you haven't had that experience, I think I've always been partly envious of people who just are so secure growing up, just so secure in like who they are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
as a 12th house person, I also I'm kind of like looking for people to tell me,
Yeah.
Like, you seem wise and you could attune to me. Tell me who I am.
Well, totally. I was having a conversation with Jonathan Coe about this, and we talked about some of our favorite allies in this world are looking at like people who have 12th house sun, because like there's just this magic ability to really truly like see everything, and to have that. And it's like what a interesting conundrum for a 12th house sun to be able to see so clearly everything about everyone else, but not be able to like see it about yourself. Yeah. And the 8th house is similar in a way,
Mm-hmm. Yes. And if you're confused by this, listeners, one of the ways that you can think about this is if you visualize your chart, if you're looking at the world from the ascendant point, astrology sees angles. You may have heard of sextiles, squares, trines, oppositions. There are these angles that you can see the rest of your chart from the ascendant point, but you can't see the 2nd house, the 6th house, the 8th house, or the 12th house by any of the angles that we acknowledge in astrology. And thus placements in those houses can feel a little bit obscured to you. Is that how you would say it?
Yeah, exactly. And the 6th house too is like another.
Did I say? Okay, yes.
You might have, but like my mind went to like.
I'm so curious if you would speak to the 6th house too, since that's where you have Saturn.
Yes. Well, Saturn and I have had a long journey. We've come a long, long way together. It's like that old Fat Boy Slim song from like the 90s. Through the good times and the bad, and it's funny, like, but Saturn and I have a good working relationship now. And with Saturn in the 6th, has life and health stuff been difficult? Absolutely, from time to time. But has Saturn helped me achieve things that I've set out to do? 100%. And it's in reflection that, I can see that, like Saturn has really helped me. Granted, I wasn't always, some of the goals that I set weren't always like thoughtful in terms of like who I really am and what I wanted, because again, 8th house, not really knowing who am I? What do you need me to be? Like, okay, what does the world say is successful? Okay, let me go out and do that. Let me have that.
Yes.
Let me have the fantastic career. Let me have the glamorous lifestyle. let me have the, what looks good, what's defined. And what was funny is like Saturn helped me get all that. But I wasn't happy. So it was like, hey, there's a disconnect here. Something's wrong. And it was because it wasn't truly for me what I wanted. But Saturn 100% has helped me like with discipline, and also has helped me become more embodied. And that has been really a big gift. Looking at my chart, I don't have a whole lot of earth energy. And so being able to daily descend into the body each day as a Saturnian practice and care for the vessel that I've been given, which honestly, as a Pisces rising, Libra sun, Libra moon, I don't really care about the body a whole lot, right? It's temporary. I don't like being in this, flesh prison. But it's very important to take care of it. And Saturn has given me many lessons on how to do that. Yes. And it's funny, you can look up, if listeners are inclined or interested in magical practice, like in addition to planetary days, which folks might know about in terms of like, Monday is Moon Day, Tuesday is Mars Day, and so on and so forth. There's also planetary hours. And a really fun thing to do is look up the hour that you were born. So I was born on Venus's day, but at Saturn's hour. And so, yeah. So to me, I look at it like, oh, I have Saturn. Saturn's kind of like a godparent in a lot of ways, if we can think about that. If like Venus is a, more of an active parental role in my chart, Saturn's like my godfather.
I've never looked that up. I'm so excited. That's the first thing I'm going to do.
I know.
We get off.
And I don't do it for everyone in my readings, but sometimes like people, one of my offerings is like around, okay, where might you have opportunity to work with planetary energy that you might not have thought about before. And so sometimes I'll get a ping to like look up somebody's the hour that they were born as well, just as like another data point for, working with planetary days and energy or hours.
Yeah. And I was thinking too, Saturn's exalted in Libra. So there's like something maybe there too.
Yeah. Yes. Someone pointed that out to me, was like, so I have Saturn in Leo in my natal chart. And for listeners, Saturn is not real happy there, just generally, because the energy of Saturn being constricting and cold, it doesn't exactly match the energy of Leo, which is, fiery and sustained and joyful and playful. And, Saturn's more serious. But if you look to the ruler of Leo is the sun, and my sun is in Libra, which this, sun is in Libra is not any great lottery winner either. But when you look at the relationship between the two, it's like, oh, that's cool.
Knowing.
Yeah. It's like, ooh, maybe there's just a different, and what's interesting about like Saturn and Leo is it doesn't necessarily have to be I wanted to say death sentence, but like that's too intense of a word, but it doesn't have to be a prognosis that's negative. It just means you have to find different unique ways of kind of accessing that energy and getting them to work together, because they just don't, it's not part of the standard operating system. Yeah.
I'm, as you know, Saturn and Leo as well. So we're both, and we've been having our Saturn opposition.
Yes.
And I have tons of planets in signs that they're not super comfortable in.
Right.
I feel like it's such an invitation to release yourself from maybe like the prescribed ways of showing up and really find your own.
Yes. I started, like one interpretation of Saturn and Leo, if we take the house aspect out of it, is around like image, like critical of image. And so I played around on Instagram. There's a couple of posts where like I was like, ooh, what does a Saturnine feline look like? And so like just putting on the costume, like I love that. And the just kind of playing with like planetary associations and colors and like astro drama, if you were to embody this planet and this sign, what would it look like? How would it speak? How would it think? How would it feel? How would it interact with others? And it's a really fun exercise. And anyway, when I got the whole thing going, it was a little like kitten with a whip, like it was,
Yeah.
Like it was a bit kinky. And I'm like, oh, this is a dimension I wouldn't necessarily would have discovered had I not been playing around with it.
Oh yes, my Saturn opposition has been the birth of my Dom period.
Yes.
Saturn's like, I think we found it.
Yes. 100%. I love it. I'm here for it.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I definitely recognize a lifelong sense of fear around visibility and constriction, play. But I love Saturn so much, like you. And Saturn is so helpful to the Pisces in us, as you were saying. So coming into right relationship with the malefics, I think that's so cool that you're doing that.
Yes. And I honestly didn't have a choice. So like, I'll just say like, given where things, and that's what happens, but it's in service of something greater. And it's been really fun. And I think that's another Venus gift, Venus 8th house gift as well. Venus rule 8th house is like being open to the connection and looking for like the beauty there, where's the gift?
Mm-hmm.
And I think working with Saturn and Mars in particular, that's been really helpful, is like, okay, is this a punishment or is this something that is another tool for my toolbox?
Yes.
And
100.
yeah, and it doesn't mean it's always pleasurable. But if you can think about, like, I recently just went through this injury that I've been dealing with. And I spent a lot of time in the 8th house, honestly, in a very liminal space, not really able to take action in the way that I wanted to, and just very idle and unpacking all of that emotion. And it brought up so much stuff. But what got me through it was like understanding that there's something on the other side of this, that's going to be helpful for me in some way. And yeah, that I'm still in process of that, but it's it's not always fun. It's not always pleasurable, but it's also understanding that, these things do pass. The intensity does pass. Feelings, especially emotions, change very rapidly. And just to kind of hang on.
Yeah, I think that what's really helped me feel safe getting to know the 8th house parts of me is learning to understand that it's part of this larger process of life, death, then life again.
Yes.
And like, I just didn't, it's like no one had ever told me that it continued, that just seemed like the end, most of my life. And astrology and the mythologies that are connected to astrology gave me this support, this buttressing for a larger process. It's like holding through the discomfort of the liminal, because there is something that's happening, that's birthing. It feels like the crucial part of the 8th house is equipping yourself with tools for understanding that,
Yeah. And I think that's what makes it challenging, is you don't always see it coming until you're there. And even then, it's a sense, you're sensing in a different way. But I loved what you were saying, Britton. And I think the idea that to welcome the gruesome parts of ourselves and to be able to integrate those, back into the whole, right? So talking about shadow work and the like, but just the ability to know that that's there. And where I find what might be a clue in understanding that is like when we find ourselves activated and triggered in everyday life and other conversations from relationships with other people or situations, that's usually a big clue of something that's possibly in your 8th house, or one way to kind of come at it sideways, since direct isn't always possible. And to like hold that with love and compassion. And that's been a huge part of, that's what I was doing like through this injury. Like it's just trying to be confronting all of the ways that I hadn't seen some of the really gruesome parts of my personality in a while, and just having to be there together.
Yeah. And it is in relationships that this stuff comes up.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's like when we're triggered, like without pre-toolkit in my life, usually it would either go black, like it would be all my fault and I'm a terrible person, and like spiral. I shouldn't be loved. Nobody should be with me. I'm horrible. This kind of like stark shame,
Right.
Or it was like projecting everything onto the other person, and like, I'm the victim, you're the problem. And like just ascribing all of this shit to them. And that's was not very helpful either,
Right. Yeah. But yet we all have to go through those experiences and have them to understand where we might look at it differently once we have the perspective and some time away from it. And I think that's, the depth that is available for folks in situation. And it's just like, oh yeah, like the more you try to avoid something, like the louder it gets. And so as unpleasant as it might be to like look at some of that stuff when it's presented to you, I'm not necessarily saying everybody needs to like sign up and go for it, like just go there, because you don't always know like what it will be or like how it will manifest or show up either. But when it's there, like, go ahead and take a moment. Like we don't need to set up camp and live here for the rest of our lives. Like I've had, which for me, like, because I have so much concentrated right there, there's a lot of magnetic pull, and I have to remember, I find it's helpful to come back to Venus in my chart because it's at the top, like everything else is, And so I think like just understanding that, it's well worth it to spend the time to unpack these things and think about it. And usually what I have found, Britton, is in those moments of untrenching and really getting to the bottom of it, there almost all the time, there has been a belief at the bottom of it that wasn't really mine, but I had adopted. And when you got to like go through the feeling to find the bottom. And then sometimes you think you're at the bottom and it's not, there's still more descent to happen. But eventually like you get to this for me, it presents as a liminal desert space. That's kind of dry, a little dry and empty. Like that's how it feels and presents to me when I know I'm at the bottom. And then it's like, okay, what beliefs exist here? And for me, belief about my worth and my value and my place in the world, that was programmed there, by overculture, by Christian hegemony, by all of the stuff like that. I had to realize like, oh, this isn't necessarily mine. And I can work to unearth it and recognize it when it comes up in other places.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like once you see it, it can't have that hidden power over you.
Right.
It's not that then you're one and done. It's
oh no, not at all. It's just beginning, really.
Right. Yeah, so I don't mean that, but I mean that little particular thing.
Yes.
Little chunk can go.
Yeah. And it's not like I don't walk around like never triggered by anything ever again. No, not at all. They're just new layers or depth or different. It'll show up in different ways. It's like, oh, I've addressed feeling XYZ in this situation. But then have you ever noticed like sometimes we'll have different symptoms, but the issue is like you get to the root and it's all the same root, you know? And that's kind of what happens here. And like, in my relationships now, I'm able to say when I am triggered. And I have a very loving partner who wants to work through things in the moment. But when I'm triggered and it's not about what's happening in the moment, but I'm triggered in the moment, but it's not really about the other person. It's about me and my issues. I have to say, hey, I understand where you're coming from and what you're trying to do right now. And I love and appreciate that. But this shit is mine. And I'm so inflamed right now. And I need to go process and like, everything is okay. Nothing's wrong. It's something that I have to manage. It has nothing to do with you. And that's been extremely helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. In my experience in codependent relationships, that's the hard part too, is like trusting that it's okay when somebody needs to go take their space.
Yeah.
You know?
Yes.
But that's how we care for ourselves and come back to ourselves.
Yes. Yeah. And a lot of us, codependency is something that it has many different faces too. Like it doesn't always just like look one way. And I think for a long time, I didn't really understand what my codependency looked like. Makes sense, right? ATALs can't really see it. You can only experience it. But I think being able to see how those tendencies might still pop up and being able to recognize, it's such skill, talking about Mars and Saturn, to be able to recognize what something is in the moment, still feel the intense feelings of being activated, but yet really consciously working to choose differently.
Mm-hmm.
And that I'm not perfected at by any means, but like it's something that I'm working on.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm very much feeling myself in healing with this of letting people be having their experience, trusting that my own discomfort is not a problem, that I can like let it be in existence here and also be okay inside myself and like able to go to sleep or something.
Yes.
Where the hard part somatically has always been being able to uncouple or unmerge from how uncomfortable it feels. Just like go about my day,
And I think that's like where we've talked before about the discharge of that energy of like giving it expression. I think really helps too. And like for me, I get to this point where I'm like, I don't know, universe, this is your problem now. like I'm at my capacity. I'm just going to put this down. And that's a prayer, believe it or not, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think hand in hand with me feeling the lightening of that somatic contraction, the softness that has been coming in my life lately has come with my work in trusting that I'm supported.
Yeah.
That prayer work of letting myself feel that I am supported, seen and unseen.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. And like, I literally talk about, somatic stuff. Like I will literally grip, like I'll find tension in my arms and in my hands from squeezing the air, squeezing my own hand. And like, I have to like remind myself to release and let it go and not to hold on. Yeah. And like the capacity, like we talk about, oh gosh, so many containers. I don't know who to credit this with, but we talk about energy leaks from time to time. And I think trying to hold it all and do it all on our own and not engage the other parts of ourselves and the liminal space is where we can release a lot of these things and let it go. And we might pick it up again unconsciously and then have to let it go again when we realize we picked it up, It's this it's work. It's work for sure. And that's why I think it's so funny that it's like the idol house in traditional astrology, because there's so much work that's there, but I guess because it's not visible in the same way that plowing a field or harvesting grain is visible, that's where it gets that idleness from. And a lot of it's out of your control too, to some degree.
Yeah. And it's interesting to think that living in a culture that shames idleness would grow a culture then that doesn't really have a lot of skill at eighth house material.
Right.
I do feel culturally that we're all really eager to be in conversations to learn these tools. I mean,
yes,
just a few years ago, we weren't really talking about trauma the way we talk about it now,
Agreed. And I think like just looking at everything in the world today, for folks, just we're all going through this great birth canal of what's coming through, what we hope to be coming through. Yeah, it's full of surrender. It's interesting. I just thought about this in this conversation, too, like I have worked as a full spectrum birth worker, and I've also worked in death care, which are, if you think about like two ends of the spectrum of the coming and going of life, there's so much parallel with the eighth house of like the theme of surrender in both of those situations, just so paramount. And I think that's what happens is like you get to the point where like you can't hold it all and you can't do it all, and you have to to be able to get, the only way out is through, and to be able to get through, you have to surrender to what's happening. And that can be applied across all different experiences, and that's where coming back to faith and trust. And other people might, based on natal chart, might have other skill,
Sure.
Like for me, it's faith and trust that things are going to work out, which is really, that's kind of idle in a lot of ways.
But it's a Jupiterian, a Jupiterian answer, a Jupiterian tool in the bag, that would be the guide, since Jupiter is your chart ruler.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
My eighth house is Scorpio, and I'm a Mars ruled chart.
Yes. And you have your Mars there too, don't you?
Well, Mars is in Cancer.
Oh, in
another
Cancer.
water sign.
Oh, right.
And
Yeah.
another planet in its fall. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think learning to sit with that inflammation is one of my Mars tools. But this is interesting. I haven't really thought of it this way, like how Mars is helping me with my 8th house experiences.
It's the transmutation. Yeah.
And I think too, there's something for me about learning to be comfortable with just such direct honesty that other parts of me are afraid of. But Mars just can only be direct. It's the only skill. The moment, directness.
Absolutely. And I think about Mars too, like, and Scorpio, like Scorpio Mars in my case, but then you having a Mars ruled chart with Mars and Cancer, like there's a strategicness about like how and where like Mars directs its energy. Like in my case, you know, it wants a sure thing. It's not going to strike unless it knows that it's going to hit and be successful. And that for me, like reflecting back into like the Saturnian influence in Leo, you know, they're connected. They're talking to one another in my chart. They're squaring one another. There's there's a definite like, okay, not only do we want to strike when it's going to be a sure thing, but we need to control how we look when we are doing it as well, in case anyone sees.
Look out.
Yeah, it's very calculated, which is what's so funny. And that's what the beauty of learning astrology has really given to me. I had a very narrow way of how I thought one acts in the world. And astrology really gave me permission, or learning about myself through astrology gave me more permission to be okay with all of these parts.
Be a little more malefic.
Yeah. Like it's okay. It's and as like we talked about Pisces, having foundation and skill for a Pisces rising, very important. You know, learned how to use that Mars. Still learning.
Because
but like
the dominant mode may be Jupiterian and Piscean, and sometimes that's not what's called for.
Yeah. And all the Venus, you know, like if you think about all the benefic energy going there, like it's yes, of course, and more, please. Like, it's funny. Charts are so magical.
They are. Thank you, charts.
Thank you, charts. Yes.
We really brought up so many of the planets today.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for your time and your wisdom, sharing your stories.
Yes. Thank you, Brittany.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on Moon to Moon. How can people connect with you?
Yes. So I am on Instagram at slow.magic with a CK. And then I'm also on the internet at slowmagic.com.
I'll have those links in there. Thank you.
You're so welcome. Thank you, Britton.
Thank you to Erin Kelley once again for joining me on Moon to Moon and sharing your wisdom with me. That was a lot of fun. Also before and after when we hung out. Listeners, if you enjoyed this conversation, I hope you will leave a review or rate the podcast. Please connect with Erin. I'll provide all the links. And I would love for you to be able to experience her offering for Cave Space called Life After the Eighth House, Healing, Miracles, and Other Riches of the Unseen Realms. Especially for those of you who are really curious about your eighth house. So much of Cave Space, Cave Space is an eighth house space. That's what it is. It's just, the whole thing is eighth house. So if you're interested in eighth house topics for yourself, because of your chart, for the charts of people in your life, if you're an emerging astrologer, I'm encouraging you to head over to my website, check out the course page, get yourself signed up. The first live is going to be on Wednesday. It's like the 26th of October. It's the 4 Wednesdays of Scorpio season that I do the lives. You do not have to be there. The replays will then become like recorded teachings in the teachable space. But if you like being live, if you like asking questions, if you just enjoy the zinginess of it, then please register before then so that you can join me and hang out. In addition to my live teachings, there are going to be hours and hours of contributions from the 12 folks that I've constellated for this offering that I hand selected. I asked them for what I wanted from them, and they were so wonderful to share their genius with us and with Cave Space. So looking forward to seeing you in Cave Space if the 8th house is calling, if Pluto's calling, if the underworld is calling, if Scorpio's calling, if Samhain is calling, if your healing path is calling you. It is a healing offering. Thank you for listening, and I'm wishing you all the best. Cheers.